Deputy Sheriff Daniel Hayes thought it was just another cold night patrol with his loyal K9, Odin. But when the headlights cut through the falling snow, a little girl stumbled onto the road, her arm broken, her eyes full of terror. Clutching a torn backpack, she whispered words that froze him in place. "Please, save me from my father. He killed my mom." Daniel had faced war, crime, and darkness, but nothing prepared him for this. The man she feared wasn't just an abuser. He was a broker of vice, laundering money and hiding sins darker than night. What happened next will shake your soul, bring tears to your eyes, and make you believe in second chances again. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far this story of courage and hope can travel. The town of Ironwood, Montana, lay under a heavy quilt of snow that night. The mountain roads twisted like frozen serpents, their edges swallowed by drifting powder. Midnight had long passed, and the only sounds were the wind scraping across pine branches and the steady crunch of boots on ice. Deputy Sheriff Daniel Hayes, 37 years old, adjusted the collar of his Navy winter patrol jacket. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with storm-gray eyes and short brown hair streaked with silver from years of stress and service. Before joining the sheriff's department, Daniel had served in the Marine Corps, a past that left him disciplined but weary. His uniform bore the gold badge of Ironwood County, and his utility belt hung heavy with radio, flashlight, and sidearm. On most nights, his patrols were uneventful, checking roads, watching over the small, quiet town. Tonight, the silence felt thicker, heavier, as though the snow itself was holding its breath. By his side moved Odin, a 5-year-old German Shepherd K9 with a strong build and black and tan coat that glistened under the headlights. Odin's ears twitched, alert to every crack in the night. His breath puffed white in the cold, but his posture remained steady and protective. He was Daniel's partner in more ways than one, the only soul who had never failed him, who shared the long hours of night duty without complaint. Daniel's patrol SUV crawled along a lonely mountain road, headlights sweeping across the icy shoulder. That was when Odin growled, a low, warning rumble that always meant something was wrong. Daniel slowed, hand moving to the radio, but then he saw it. A small figure stumbled into the glow of the lights. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old. She wore a thin, red coat torn at the elbow, jeans soaked to the knee, and snow boots several sizes too big. Her blonde hair was matted against her pale face, and her left arm hung stiff against her side, wrapped in a makeshift bandage of torn cloth. She looked like a ghost against the snow, except her eyes were alive with fear. Daniel slammed the brakes and threw open his door. Odin bounded out, keeping close but cautious, his body language protective rather than aggressive. The girl stood trembling, clutching a ripped pink backpack against her chest. Her lips were blue from the cold, but her voice, when it came, cut sharper than the wind. "Please," she whispered, eyes fixed on Daniel. "Please, save me from my daddy." Daniel froze for a moment, struck by the raw desperation in her tone. He crouched low so he wouldn't tower over her, his breath fogging between them. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, voice steady, practiced in gentleness. She hesitated before answering. "Olivia. Olivia Carter. I'm 7. Daniel's gaze dropped to her arm. The cloth was stained dark, and the angle of her wrist told him enough. Broken. She must have been in agony. He extended his gloved hand. "You're safe now, Olivia. I'm Deputy Hayes. This is Odin. We'll take care of you." But Olivia shook her head fiercely, tears streaming hot across her frozen cheeks. She clutched at Daniel's jacket with surprising strength for someone so small. "You don't understand," she said, almost choking on the words. "He killed Mommy. He said I was next." Daniel's stomach turned cold. He had seen horrors overseas, had handled violent crimes back home, but hearing those words from a child's mouth felt like ice cutting through his chest. Olivia pressed on, voice trembling but determined. He hurts people, not just Mommy. He makes women do bad things. He takes their money. He says nobody can stop him. Please, please don't send me back." Her words tumbled out like an avalanche, heavy and unstoppable. Daniel realized that this was no ordinary domestic case. This child wasn't just running from a cruel parent. She was escaping a man who lived in shadows, the kind who profited from suffering. He pulled his radio but stopped halfway. If what Olivia said was true, then trusting the wrong channel could be dangerous. If her father was involved in prostitution rings or laundering money, he might have influence. For now, Daniel needed to move carefully. He guided Olivia gently toward the SUV. "Come on, let's get you warm. You can tell me everything." Odin trotted beside them, his body brushing against Olivia's leg like a silent shield. The girl reached down with her good hand and touched his fur. For the first time, a flicker of calm passed across her face. Inside the SUV, Daniel cranked the heater. Olivia curled into the seat, still hugging her backpack. Odin sat at her feet, eyes locked on her as if sensing the depth of her wounds. Daniel leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Olivia, I need you to be brave. You said your father killed your mother. Do you know when that happened?" Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "Last week. He hit her with a bottle. There was blood. So much blood. He said she was just sleeping. But I saw her. She wasn't breathing anymore." Daniel gripped the wheel tighter than he meant to. "And what else does your father do?" She swallowed hard. "He makes women. He makes them go with men for money. Lots of women. He tells them if they don't listen, he'll hurt them or send them away. And he has friends. Men with cars and guns. They come to our house. They laugh. They give him money. Mommy said it was dirty money. She told me once. She whispered that if something ever happened to her, I had to run. Run and find someone who could fight monsters." The car filled with silence. Outside, the snow thickened, wrapping Ironwood's mountains in ghostly white. Inside, Daniel felt the weight of her words press against him like stone. He glanced at Odin, whose ears flicked as if he too understood the gravity of the night. Then Daniel looked at Olivia. Small, and broken in the passenger seat, and he knew one truth. There was no turning back. "I promise you this," Daniel said, his voice low but unwavering. "He's not going to touch you again. Not while I'm here." Olivia looked up at him, her wide eyes reflecting both terror and hope. She clutched the dog tag on his uniform as though testing if his promise was real. Then, in a voice so faint he almost missed it, she whispered, "Then please, Uncle Dan, don't let him find me." Daniel placed a hand on Odin's strong neck, and the shepherd leaned forward, pressing against Olivia's knee with quiet devotion. The snow howled outside. The road stretched into darkness, but in that moment, Daniel knew. His war wasn't over. It had just begun. The heater inside Daniel's patrol SUV rattled weakly as it tried to fight back the cold that seeped through the windows. Olivia sat curled in the passenger seat, the oversized pink backpack clutched tight to her chest like a life preserver. Odin remained stationed at her feet, head raised, amber eyes flicking between Daniel and the child, as though silently measuring the weight of every word that had been spoken. The drive back to the substation was silent except for the crunch of tires over snow and the occasional gust of wind. The Ironwood substation was small, barely more than a weathered cabin repurposed as a sheriff's outpost. Built decades earlier, it had 2 holding cells, a front desk, and Daniel's cramped office lined with old case files. It was where he often spent the dead of night filling out reports, Odin asleep at his side. Tonight, the station lights glowed like a lonely beacon in the white wilderness as he pulled the SUV into its lot. Daniel shut off the engine and turned to Olivia. "We'll go inside where it's warm. You'll be safe here." He opened the door, careful not to move too quickly. Olivia hesitated, clutching her backpack harder, but Odin's presence seemed to anchor her courage. She followed them inside, boots squeaking on the linoleum floor. The heat inside the station was a relief, though the air smelled faintly of old coffee and disinfectant. Daniel guided Olivia into his office. He placed a blanket around her shoulders and set a steaming cup of cocoa, pulled from a stash he kept for long winter nights, on the desk. She stared at it, then back at him, before murmuring a quiet, "Thank you." Daniel lowered himself into the chair opposite her. "Olivia, you told me some very serious things. I need to know what's in that backpack." Her arms tightened around it. Her face was pale, framed by hair that hadn't been brushed in days. Her broken arm rested stiffly in its crude cloth sling. After a long pause, she slowly unzipped the faded zipper. The sound was loud in the silence of the room. The first item she pulled out was a kitchen knife, its blade wrapped in a dish towel but still stained with dark patches that had dried to a rusty brown. Daniel's breath hitched. He'd seen blood before, too much of it, but holding evidence in such small, trembling hands was another matter. This is what he used on Mommy," Olivia whispered. Her good hand shook as she set it on the desk. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing composure. "You were brave to take this, Olivia. It could help bring him to justice." Next, she withdrew a small black USB drive shaped like a silver star. "Mommy gave me this," she said. "She told me it was important. She said if anything happened, I should keep it safe, because it had the truth inside." Daniel's eyes narrowed. A cold realization crawled over him. Evidence. Proof of everything the girl had said. Prostitution. Money laundering. And abuse. Maybe even murder. Finally, Olivia pulled free a small bundle of photographs held together with a rubber band. Daniel leaned closer as she set them down. The first photo showed a woman, her mother, with bruises on her arms and a split lip. The second was worse, dark swelling around her eye, a face marked by fear. By the third, Daniel had to close his eyes for a moment. Each image screamed violence, cruelty repeated over time. Olivia's voice trembled. "She told me to take pictures when Daddy was mean. She said the police wouldn't believe her without proof." Daniel pressed his fingertips against the desk, grounding himself. The evidence on his desk wasn't just proof of domestic violence. It was a window into a criminal empire run by a man willing to kill his own wife and terrorize his daughter. The radio on his belt crackled faintly, then hissed into silence. Daniel hesitated before turning the volume down. Not everyone could be trusted. If Victor Carter truly was the man Olivia described, his influence might spread further than ironwood. Daniel's gut told him to keep this between himself, Odin, and the girl, at least for now. He leaned forward. "Olivia, you did the right thing. What's in here?" He tapped the photos and the USB. "Could stop him from hurting more people. I need you to trust me a little longer. Can you do that?" Olivia's eyes shimmered with tears, but she nodded. "I don't want to go back. Not ever." Odin shifted closer, resting his chin gently on her lap. She stroked his head absent-mindedly, comforted by the steady warmth. For the first time, Daniel saw her shoulders loosen slightly, the iron grip of fear beginning to ease. A sudden knock broke the quiet. Daniel stood, hand near his holster, but relaxed when he saw the visitor through the glass door. It was Evelyn Carter, Olivia's aunt on her mother's side, though Daniel hadn't seen her in years. Evelyn was in her early 40s, with auburn hair tied back in a simple bun, wearing a wool coat dusted with snow. She worked at the Ironwood Diner and was known around town as a hard-working woman who had raised 2 sons of her own before moving back to care for her ailing father. Her face now carried deep worry, etched into every line. "Deputy Hayes," she said softly when Daniel opened the door, "they told me you brought Olivia in." Her eyes fell on the child and she covered her mouth in shock. "Oh, God, her arm!" Olivia flinched, drawing closer to Odin. Daniel raised a calming hand. "She's safe now, Evelyn. She needs warmth and care. Do you know what happened?" Evelyn shook her head, trembling. "I tried to get her away months ago, but Victor, he threatened me. He said if I ever came near, he'd make me disappear too. I couldn't fight him." Tears welled in her eyes. "I thought he'd kill me. I'm so sorry, Olivia." Olivia didn't answer. She pressed her face into Odin's fur, choosing silence over words. Daniel decided quickly. "She stays here tonight. I'll handle the rest." Evelyn nodded reluctantly. "I can't protect her from him." "But you can." Daniel's resolve hardened. He glanced at the desk where the knife, the photos, and the USB sat like silent witnesses. Proof of Victor Carter's cruelty. Proof of a man who had built an empire of pain in the shadows of their small town. He looked back at Olivia, who clung to Odin as though he were the last steady thing in her collapsing world. "Don't worry," Daniel said firmly. "He won't touch you again." Outside, the snow kept falling, muffling the world in a blanket of white. But inside the Ironwood substation, the night had changed. Daniel knew the storm was just beginning. The wind howled through Ironwood's narrow streets, sweeping loose snow across the empty sidewalks and rattling the old tin signs above shuttered shops. Inside the sheriff's substation, the single lamp in Daniel's office cast a warm but fragile glow. Olivia had fallen asleep on the worn leather couch, her arm in the makeshift sling resting awkwardly against her chest. A wool blanket covered her small frame. Odin lay curled at her feet, his ears twitching every so often, never fully asleep. Daniel sat at his desk, staring at the knife wrapped in a towel and the photos spread out beside it. The USB drive lay in the center like a silent heartbeat, pulsing with secrets. He'd seen evidence before, enough to know what it meant. This wasn't just a family tragedy. This was the edge of something that could shake their whole county. The clock ticked past 2 a.m. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The station was usually quiet at this hour, just the groan of the heater and Odin's steady breathing. But tonight felt different, like the snow carried whispers. Then Odin rose suddenly, body stiff, ears pointed toward the window. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Daniel froze, instinct sharpening. He stood slowly, hand hovering near his holster, and moved to the window. Outside, parked across the street beneath the shadow of a dying street lamp, was a black SUV. Its windows were tinted, its engine still running, visible only through plumes of exhaust curling in the cold. Daniel muttered under his breath. "Damn it!" He grabbed his flashlight, motioned Odin to stay alert, and slipped out the front door. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the street. The SUV's headlights flicked on for half a second, then went dark again. When Daniel reached the driver's side window, it rolled down just enough to reveal a man's face half hidden by a hood. The man was in his late 20s, lean but wiry, with restless eyes that darted between Daniel's badge and his gun. He wore a cheap leather jacket, scuffed jeans, and a ball cap pulled low. His fingers drummed nervously against the wheel. Daniel recognized the look. Street muscle. Someone used to taking orders. "Evening," Daniel said coldly. "You lost." The man smirked, though his voice betrayed unease. "Just waiting on a friend. Roads are icy. Don't want to wreck." Daniel angled the flashlight. "Friend happened to be named Victor Carter?" The smirk faltered. The man shifted in his seat. "Don't know what you're talking about, officer." "Deputy," Daniel corrected sharply. "And if you're sitting out here at 2 a.m, across from a sheriff's office, I call that suspicious. Step out of the vehicle." The man hesitated, but the tone in Daniel's voice left no room. He stepped out, standing stiff in the cold. His boots were thin-soled, the kind worn in city streets, not mountain snow. "What's your name?" Daniel demanded. The man licked his lips. "Travis. Travis Moore." Daniel knew the name faintly. A drifter from Billings, rumored to be mixed up in small-time drug runs. Now he was here, tailing Daniel's office. "You know Victor Carter," Daniel pressed. "You're watching this building because of him." Travis's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, carefully. If you go back to Victor, you tell him this. He doesn't scare me, and he sure as hell isn't getting near that little girl. You understand?" Travis shifted uncomfortably, then muttered, "You don't know who you're messing with." Daniel grabbed his collar and shoved him back against the SUV door. "You don't know who you're messing with," he growled. "Now get the hell out of my town before I book you on obstruction and stalking charges." Travis's eyes flickered with fear, but he pulled away, slid back into the SUV, and peeled off into the snowy night. Daniel stood in the street watching the taillights fade into the hills. He knew Victor Carter wouldn't stop. Tonight was only the beginning. Back inside the station, Odin immediately pressed against Daniel's leg, his nose still wet from the frosty air. Daniel exhaled and glanced toward the couch. Olivia stirred restlessly in her sleep, whimpering, her face twisted in fear. Moments later, her cry tore through the silence. "No! Stop, Daddy! Please don't!" Daniel rushed over, kneeling beside her. But Odin was already there. The German Shepherd climbed onto the couch gently, pressing his head against Olivia's chest. She clutched his fur, sobbing, eyes still half closed in the throes of her nightmare. Odin didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply stayed, a living weight, anchoring her to the safety of the present. Daniel rested a hand on her blanket. "It's all right, Olivia. He's not here. You're safe now." Her sobs quieted slowly as Odin licked the tears from her cheek. She buried her face in his neck, whispering something Daniel could barely hear. "Don't let him take me." Daniel sat back on his heels, the weight of the night pressing down harder than the snow outside. He had faced criminals, addicts, men who'd lost everything. But seeing a child broken by fear, that was a different war. He glanced at the desk where the knife, photos, and USB still waited. Victor Carter knew Olivia had escaped. His men were already circling. The line had been drawn. Daniel whispered, almost to himself, "We'll protect her, Odin, no matter what." Odin's ears twitched as if in agreement, and the storm raged louder outside, wrapping Ironwood in its icy grip. The morning after the long night came with a pale, gray sun straining weakly through heavy clouds. The storm had eased but left the world buried in thick snow, the trees sagging under its weight. Daniel hadn't slept. He spent the hours at his desk, eyes locked on the USB drive and the photographs. Olivia was still resting on the couch, Odin curled protectively at her side. When dawn reached the windows, Daniel decided he couldn't sit idle. Travis Moore's black SUV had left tire tracks cutting deep into the snow outside the station before disappearing toward the Ridge Road. If Travis had been reporting back to Victor, those tracks might lead to more than just a hiding spot. They might reveal one of Victor's operations. Daniel buttoned his coat, strapped his utility belt around his waist, and slung his rifle across his shoulder. He crouched beside Olivia before leaving. "I'll be back. Odin's coming with me. But you're safe here. Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me. Understand?" She nodded sleepily, still clutching Odin's blanket. "Promise?" "I promise." Odin trotted to the door, ready. Together they followed the tire tracks out of Ironwood, into the dense pine forest where the snow muffled all sound but the crunch of their boots. The tracks grew fresher, marked by streaks of mud and a faint dark stain. Daniel stopped, kneeling to touch it. Blood. The trail led them deeper, through twisting paths and past half-frozen streams. After an hour, they reached a clearing where a weather-beaten wooden shack crouched against the tree line. Its boards were warped, roof patched with rusted tin. Smoke no longer rose from its chimney, but the air carried a sour stench of decay and gasoline. Daniel signaled Odin to stay low. He approached carefully, boots silent in the snow. A broken padlock dangled from the door. With one push, the door creaked open. Inside, the air was damp and foul. The single-room shack was barely lit, only a shaft of sunlight cutting through gaps in the boards. Against the far wall stood a row of metal-framed beds with stained mattresses. Handcuffs were bolted to 2 of them. A metal bucket lay overturned, flies buzzing lazily even in the cold. On the floor were scraps of women's clothing, cheap dresses, torn fabric, a shoe missing its pair. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen places like this before, overseas and at crime scenes. This wasn't just a hideout, it was a holding pen. Odin moved forward, nose twitching, and barked sharply. Daniel followed his gaze to the wall. There, smeared faintly across the wood, were streaks of dried blood. The shack whispered its history without words. Screams swallowed by trees, lives broken in silence. Daniel felt the air grow heavier, pressing down on him like the snow-laden branches above. Victor Carter wasn't merely a domestic abuser. He was running something monstrous, something that spanned beyond Ironwood's borders. As Daniel surveyed the shack, he noticed movement from the corner. A figure slumped near the stove. He raised his rifle but then realized it was a woman. She looked to be in her early 30s, thin to the point of frailty, with dark hair chopped unevenly at the shoulders. Her clothes were torn, a faded sweatshirt and leggings smeared with dirt. Her face was pale, hollow-cheeked, eyes wide with fear. Daniel crouched slowly, lowering his rifle. "Ma'am, my name is Deputy Hayes. You're safe now." Her lips quivered as she tried to speak. He left us here. Said he'd come back for the others. I ran when I heard the car leave, but I couldn't get far." "What's your name?" Daniel asked gently. "Clara. Clara Jennings." She coughed weakly, clutching her side. "I'm from Spokane. He promised me a job. Then there was no way out." Daniel's heart hardened further. Clara was one of many. He offered her a canteen of water. "You're not going back to him. Not now, not ever." Clara drank with shaking hands, tears streaking her dirty face. There were 3 more. He took them 2 nights ago. Said they had to work. Said... Her voice broke. Daniel steadied her shoulder. "You've been through hell, but you're not alone anymore. Can you walk?" Clara tried to rise but staggered. Daniel slipped an arm under hers, supporting her weight. Odin circled them, ears high, scanning the woods for danger. They moved out of the shack, leaving behind the stench of pain. Daniel took one last look before pulling the door shut. It wasn't enough to rescue survivors. He needed to burn Victor Carter's entire operation to the ground. On the trek back, Clara spoke in broken fragments about how Victor's men patrolled the woods, how women were rotated between safe houses across state lines, how money flowed through businesses no one suspected. Daniel listened, memorizing every detail. By the time they reached the substation, the sky was a bruised gray, snowflakes falling again. Daniel helped Clara into the holding area, setting her on a cot with blankets. Olivia peeked from the office doorway, eyes wide, hugging the pink backpack. "She's safe," Daniel assured both of them. "Victor can't reach her now." Clara met Olivia's gaze, and for a moment there was an unspoken bond between them. 2 survivors of the same monster. Daniel leaned against the desk, the weight of it all bearing down on him. Evidence was piling up. Women imprisoned in the woods, bloodstains on shack walls, Olivia's testimony, the USB. All threads tied back to Victor Carter. And Daniel knew one thing clearly. If Victor had lost track of Olivia, he would come hunting. The snow continued to fall outside the substation, blanketing Ironwood in silence. Inside, the air was heavy, as though the walls themselves carried the weight of secrets too dark to hold. Clara Jennings lay asleep on the cot in the holding area, her breathing shallow but steady under the blankets Daniel had given her. Olivia sat curled in a chair beside Odin, her small fingers tangled in his thick fur. She hadn't spoken much since Daniel returned from the woods. Daniel stood at his desk, staring at the USB drive shaped like a star. It gleamed faintly under the lamplight, its tiny body containing the truth he suspected but dreaded to see. He glanced at Olivia, then back at the drive. "Olivia," he said gently, crouching to her level, "you told me your mother gave you this. Can you tell me why?" The girl hesitated, chewing her lip. Then her eyes welled up, and she whispered, "She said, if she disappeared, I should give it to someone who could fight monsters. She said the truth was inside." Daniel nodded. "Do you know what's on it?" Olivia clutched Odin tighter, pressing her cheek into his fur. Her broken arm twitched against the sling, and tears slid down her face. "It's Mommy. She used her phone to record when Daddy hurt her. She told me I might have to keep it safe." Her voice cracked. "She said, if something happened to her, I should find someone who could protect me. Someone real." Daniel's chest tightened. He reached out and gently took the USB. "You were brave to carry this. Your mom trusted you with something very important." Olivia's small voice trembled. "Can you watch it, Uncle Dan? I don't want to, but you should know." Daniel hesitated only a moment before slotting the USB into his old department laptop. The screen flickered, loading files. He opened the first video. The room on the screen was familiar. A modest house with faded curtains and a kitchen in the background. Olivia's mother, a woman in her mid-30s with light hair pulled back in a bun, stood facing the camera. Her face bore bruises, her voice low and urgent. "If you're seeing this, it means he's gone too far. My name is Laura Carter. My husband, Victor Carter, has been hurting me for years. He runs girls. He launders money. He keeps records. If I don't make it, please, someone protect my daughter." Daniel's jaw clenched as the video shifted. Victor entered the room, tall, broad, in a black suit jacket. His face twisted with rage as he shouted at Laura, his words muffled but violent. Then, without hesitation, he struck her. She crumpled against the wall. The footage blurred as Victor lunged again. He grabbed a bottle from the counter and brought it down. The sickening crack of glass echoed, followed by Laura's scream. The screen went dark. Daniel slammed the laptop shut. The room was silent except for the wind rattling against the windows. His breath came ragged, his knuckles white on the desk. He had seen violence before, but never so raw, never captured through the terrified eyes of a child. Olivia sat trembling, eyes wide, searching his face for answers. "Is she gone?" Daniel swallowed hard. He couldn't bring himself to lie. "Yes, Olivia. I'm so sorry. Your mom is gone." The little girl buried her face in Odin's neck, sobbing. The shepherd stayed still, unmoving, absorbing her grief with quiet strength. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, letting her know she wasn't alone. In the corner, Clara stirred, watching quietly. Her hollow eyes flicked from Olivia to Daniel, and for the first time, she spoke with something resembling strength. "She did the right thing, recording that. Most of us, we don't get the chance. He wanted the fear to be invisible. She made it real." Daniel nodded, though his throat was tight. He glanced at Clara. "How long has Victor been running this?" Clara exhaled shakily. "Years, maybe longer. He's got men everywhere. Some are scared of him, others are paid too well to care. If that drive has more than videos, if it has his money trails, it's enough to burn him down. But you have to move fast. He won't let that kind of truth sit out there." Daniel pressed his palms against the desk, forcing himself to breathe. His mission was no longer just about protecting a child. It was about dismantling a monster. And the proof was right here, in his hands. He turned back to Olivia, who clung to Odin like he was the only steady ground she had left. Daniel bent down, his voice steady but gentle. "Listen to me, Olivia. Your mother was brave. She gave us the truth, and I promise you, on her name and yours, I won't stop until he's brought down." Olivia lifted her tear-stained face. For the first time there was something beyond fear in her eyes. A spark of hope, fragile but alive. She whispered, "Mommy said you'd come. Someone like you." Daniel placed the USB carefully into his inner pocket. The weight of it felt heavier than any weapon he had ever carried. Proof, evidence, justice, all sealed inside a child's confession and a mother's final stand. The storm outside swelled again, wind hammering against the walls of the substation. But inside, Daniel's resolve hardened. He knew what he had to do. The night wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about the fight for truth. The storm had not relented. Snow lashed against the small sheriff's substation as if the mountains themselves wanted to bury it whole. Inside, Daniel sat at his desk, every sense sharp, waiting for the next move. Clara slept uneasily in the holding cot, still weak from her time in the shack. Olivia, huddled on the couch, refused to let go of Odin's fur, her wide eyes tracing the shadows cast by the flickering lamp. Daniel had spent years on the force, but the silence that settled before violence always had the same taste. Metallic, electric, like the moment before lightning struck. He stood, checked his rifle, and adjusted the holster at his hip. "Stay alert, boy," he whispered to Odin. The shepherd lifted his head, ears pricking, nose twitching toward the door. The attack came quickly. The front windows shattered in an explosion of glass, shards spraying across the floor. Bullets chewed into the wooden walls, sending Olivia screaming as she dropped to the ground. Daniel dove across the room, dragging her behind the desk while Odin barked, a deep and furious sound that filled the station. 3 men stormed inside through the broken doorway, snow swirling behind them. They were rough-looking, dressed in heavy jackets and combat boots, faces hardened by years of dirty work. The first man was Ray Delgado, mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, his black beard flecked with gray. A tattoo of a snake coiled up his neck. Ray had served time for armed robbery before Victor Carter pulled him into the fold as muscle. He carried a shotgun, his stance wide, eyes scanning for his target. Behind him came Mick Hanrahan, late 20s, thin but wiry, his head shaved, wearing a green parka. Mick had grown up bouncing between foster homes and juvie, eventually finding loyalty only in gangs. He wielded a pistol, the way a man holds something he thinks gives him power. The last was Jonas Pike, nearing 40, with a narrow face and jittery movements. Once a mechanic, Jonas fell into debt and into Victor's grip. He wore a padded vest and clutched a crowbar in one hand, a pistol in the other. Ray barked, "Find the girl." But Odin was already moving. The shepherd leapt from behind the desk, slamming into Jonas with a snarl. The man's pistol clattered to the floor as Odin's jaws clamped down on his arm. Jonas screamed, thrashing as the dog dragged him down. Daniel rose from cover, his rifle leveled. He fired once, hitting Mick in the shoulder. The younger man spun, collapsing against the wall, blood staining his parka. Ray swung his shotgun toward Daniel, but Daniel ducked back, glass exploding above his head as pellets ripped into the filing cabinet. "Olivia, stay down," Daniel shouted. He rolled across the floor, grabbed Mick's fallen pistol, and kicked Ray's legs out from under him. The bigger man crashed to the ground, his shotgun skidding across the tiles. Daniel pressed the barrel of the pistol to his temple. "Don't move." Ray snarled, teeth bared, but stilled. Jonas continued to scream as Odin held him pinned, the shepherd's growls vibrating like thunder. Daniel kicked the shotgun away and yanked Ray's hands behind his back, cuffing him with practiced efficiency. He glanced at Mick, groaning on the floor, blood seeping between his fingers as he clutched his wound. Clara had woken during the chaos, clutching the bars of the holding cell, her face pale but her voice sharp. "Don't let them take her," she cried. Daniel met her eyes. "They won't." He dragged Ray upright and slammed him against the desk. "Talk. Why now? Why here?" Ray spat blood onto the floor. "You already know why. Victor wants the drive. He'll burn this whole town to get it back." Daniel's jaw tightened. And he sent you to do his dirty work? Ray smirked bitterly. We're just the beginning. Daniel's fist slammed into his gut, folding him in half. If you're smart, you'll start talking details. Ray coughed, gasping. Warehouse. By the river. That's where he runs things. But you'll never touch him. He's untouchable. Daniel's eyes burned with a cold fury. He shoved Ray into a chair and bound his legs. Odin released Jonas on command, growling as the man whimpered, clutching his bleeding arm. Daniel cuffed him too, ignoring his curses. The substation was wrecked. Glass shattered, furniture overturned, blood smeared across the floor. Olivia peeked out from behind the desk, her face pale but unbroken. She scrambled to Odin, wrapping her good arm around his neck. He licked her cheek, tail thumping weakly against the floor. Daniel crouched beside her, his voice steady despite the adrenaline still surging in his veins. You're safe, Olivia. He won't get you. Not tonight. Tears streaked her face, but she nodded. Odin saved me. Daniel ruffled the shepherd's fur. He always does. For now, the immediate threat was over. 2 of Victor's men were restrained, one bleeding badly and the other pinned by fear. The station, however, was no longer safe. Victor knew where Olivia was, and Daniel knew the attacks would keep coming. But in that moment, as snow drifted through the broken windows and the floor glistened with shards and blood, one truth anchored him. Olivia was alive, and Victor Carter had just declared open war. The aftermath of the assault lingered inside the substation. The broken windows were hastily covered with plywood, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to the air. Blood stained the floor where Mick had fallen, though Daniel had bound his wound before transferring him into the holding cell beside Jonas. Ray sat cuffed to a chair, glaring in silence, his snake tattoo coiling with every tense movement of his jaw. Clara, pale but steadier, sat wrapped in blankets, watching the scene unfold with haunted eyes. Daniel moved methodically, his boots crunching over broken glass, but his gaze never drifted far from Olivia. She was still seated near the couch, Odin pressed close to her side. Her small hand rested on the shepherd's neck as if clinging to the only certainty she had left. The station had been turned into a battlefield, yet she remained at its fragile center, caught between terror and trust. Daniel crouched in front of her, his face weary but firm. His storm-gray eyes softened as he looked at her. Olivia, he said quietly, I need you to hear me. After everything that's happened, after what he's done, I swear to you, he will never touch you again. Not while I'm breathing. The words hung heavy in the room, steadier than the wind outside. Olivia blinked up at him, her lips trembling. You promise? Daniel nodded once, no hesitation. I promise. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't only born of fear. Slowly, she whispered, Uncle Dan. The name slipped from her like a test, fragile and tentative, but it cracked the silence more powerfully than a gunshot. Daniel felt something inside him shift. He had lost comrades in war, lost friends to darkness, and learned to live without family. Yet in that moment, a broken little girl had chosen him as her anchor. Odin, as if understanding the significance, leaned forward and licked the bandaged fingers of her broken arm. Olivia let out a small laugh through her tears, the sound delicate but real. She reached down, stroking the dog's fur with her good hand. He's my hero, too. Daniel's chest tightened. He always will be. From the corner, Clara spoke softly. She's stronger than she knows. You both are. Her voice was steadier now, though her body still carried the weariness of captivity. Daniel stood, turning to face the men he had locked up. You tell Victor, he said, his voice cold as iron. He's already lost, because she isn't alone anymore. Ray spat on the floor, eyes burning with hatred, but he said nothing. Jonas stared at the floor, too shaken by Odin's attack to meet Daniel's gaze. Mick, pale from blood loss, groaned weakly in his cell. Daniel ignored them and moved back to Olivia. He knelt once more, speaking softly, not as an officer but as someone who understood the fragile weight of promises. "I know you've lost so much, Olivia, but you've got me now. And you've got Odin. That means you've got family." She reached forward, slipping her small hand into his gloved one. "Family?" "Yes," Daniel said firmly. "Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who fight for you, who stand beside you, no matter what." The wind howled outside, snow swirling against the plywood boards covering the windows. Yet within the battered walls of the substation, a fragile warmth sparked, a vow sealed not by blood but by courage and choice. Daniel squeezed her hand lightly. "From now on, no matter what storms come, you're not alone. I'll keep you safe." Olivia leaned against Odin, her eyes finally closing in the safety of exhaustion. For the first time since he had found her on that frozen road, her breathing slowed into a steady rhythm. Daniel sat back, rifle resting across his knees, keeping silent watch as the night deepened. Outside, the snow fell harder, but the oath he had spoken burned hotter than the cold could reach. The storm broke by nightfall, leaving Ironwood draped in a deceptive calm. The substation, still scarred from the assault, stood silent behind boarded windows. Daniel prepared for what came next, his rifle cleaned, magazines reloaded, and every inch of his gear checked twice. The confession Ray had spat out during interrogation echoed in his mind. Warehouse by the river. It wasn't just a smuggling stop. It was where Victor kept his secrets, and maybe where he would show his hand. Daniel pulled on his heavy winter coat, its dark navy fabric worn at the shoulders, his badge glinting dully in the lamplight. His storm-gray eyes reflected the steel of his resolve. Odin padded beside him, obedient and eager, the shepherd's breath rising in steady clouds against the frigid air. Daniel glanced back into the office one last time. Olivia was asleep, curled up with a stuffed bear Clara had found in lost property. Odin's blanket draped over her. Clara herself sat awake, pale but resolute, sipping weak tea. Daniel had left clear instructions. "Lock the doors. Don't answer to anyone but me. If something happens, call the state troopers." Clara nodded without protest, her haunted eyes betraying how much she wanted him to come back alive. The drive to the warehouse was long and quiet, headlights cutting across snow-crusted roads. The river cut a jagged line through Ironwood's outskirts, its banks lined with rusted docks and abandoned buildings. When Daniel finally saw the warehouse, its corrugated metal walls loomed like a sleeping beast. A single floodlight flickered above a wide loading bay where trucks stood idle, their exhaust puffing faintly. Daniel parked a good distance away and moved in on foot, Odin at his heel. As they drew closer, Odin's ears flicked forward, his tail stiff, body low. He had picked up a scent. Daniel knelt, whispering, "What do you have, boy?" Odin padded toward the side wall, sniffing along the corrugated panels before barking once, sharp and urgent. Daniel pressed his ear against the wall. Beneath the low hum of machinery inside, he heard faint cries, muffled, desperate. He moved around the side until he found a warped wooden door. Slipping inside, he crouched low in the shadows. The warehouse interior stretched cavernous, lit by overhead lamps that buzzed faintly. Wooden crates stacked high along the walls bore shipping labels from across state lines. Men moved among them. Victor's crew. Daniel counted at least 6, armed, pacing as they checked clipboards and loaded boxes into a semi-truck. And then he saw him, Victor Carter, mid-40s, tall with broad shoulders, his dark hair slicked back and his expensive wool coat standing out against the grim setting. He carried himself like a man who thought he owned everything in his sight. His expression was cold, a predator's mask of control. He barked orders, his voice carrying over the hum of forklifts. "Get those crates moving. That money doesn't sit in Ironwood longer than it has to." Daniel's stomach tightened. This was it. The man who had destroyed a family, who had turned the town's shadows into a business. But Odin led him to something else first. Near the back of the warehouse, behind a partition of plywood, the shepherd pawed frantically at the baseboard, whining low. Daniel crouched and pressed his ear close. The muffled cries grew louder, women's voices. He eased the plywood aside, revealing a hidden holding area. 3 women huddled on a dirty mattress, their faces pale and clothes torn. Their eyes widened at the sight of Daniel's badge and rifle. One of them, no more than 19, whispered, "Please, get us out." Daniel's throat tightened. "I will. But you need to stay quiet. Help is coming." He slipped a small folding knife to one, nodding to the rope binding her wrist. Then he moved back into the shadows, Odin following. But his cover didn't last. A guard spotted Odin's movement near the crates and shouted, "Who the hell?" His voice cut off as Odin lunged, knocking him flat with a growl. Daniel sprang forward, rifle raised, firing 2 controlled shots that sent another man sprawling before he could draw. Chaos erupted instantly. Shouts, gunfire echoing through the metal cavern. Victor spun, rage flashing across his face. "It's the deputy! Kill him!" Daniel ducked behind a stack of crates, bullets splintering wood around him. He returned fire, dropping one of the crew who had climbed a forklift for vantage. Odin barreled into a second, dragging him down by the arm until his pistol clattered away. Through the chaos, Daniel locked eyes with Victor across the warehouse floor. The man smirked coldly, unflinching even as his men fell around him. Victor gestured to the semi-truck. "Load it! Move!" Daniel realized with horror that the crates weren't just cash. They carried records, evidence, the entire financial backbone of Victor's empire. If they left the warehouse, Ironwood might never see justice. He reloaded quickly, then moved closer, Odin clearing the path ahead. The shepherd's snarls reverberated through the cavern, terrifying the remaining crew. Daniel fired again, dropping the last armed man before the truck could pull away. The cavern went eerily silent except for Odin's heavy panting and the muffled sobs from the women hidden behind the partition. Victor stood at the edge of the bay, fury etched into every line of his face. But instead of staying, he turned and bolted toward a side exit. Daniel's instinct was to chase, but Odin barked, drawing his attention back to the plywood wall. The women were free now, clinging to each other, waiting for rescue. Daniel cursed under his breath. He couldn't leave them vulnerable, not with Victor still roaming. He radioed quickly to the state troopers, voice clipped with urgency. "This is Deputy Hayes. I need units at the river warehouse now. Multiple hostages. Suspect Victor Carter on site." Odin barked again, standing guard over the women as if daring the shadows to move. Daniel exhaled, gripping his rifle tighter. He had stopped the shipment, saved the women, but Victor was still out there. The river warehouse still echoed with the chaos Daniel and Odin had unleashed. Crates lay shattered, bundles of money spilled across the floor, and 3 terrified women huddled in the corner waiting for state troopers. But Daniel's focus was sharp, his rifle raised, eyes sweeping the cavernous building for Victor Carter. Somewhere in the dark, the man who had destroyed Olivia's life was still moving. The sudden sound of an engine outside snapped Daniel's head toward the loading bay. Tires screeched, doors slammed, and the heavy thud of boots followed. He cursed under his breath. Reinforcements. When the steel doors burst open, Daniel's heart dropped. Victor Carter entered, flanked by 2 men, and clutched in his arm, pale and trembling, was Olivia. Daniel froze. He had left her under Clara's watch at the substation, secure behind locked doors. But Clara had been weak, barely recovered. If Victor's men had tracked them, it wouldn't have taken much to force their way in. The realization stabbed him. While he and Odin stormed the warehouse, Victor's crew had slipped into Ironwood and snatched Olivia. Now she was here, held against her will in the belly of the beast. Victor looked every bit the predator exposed. His expensive coat was ripped, his hair slicked back with sweat, his face lined with fury. The pistol in his hand gleamed beneath the warehouse lights, pressed against Olivia's temple. His eyes locked onto Daniel's with murderous rage. "You thought you could take everything from me," Victor shouted, his voice booming. "You thought you could walk into my world and tear it down? You forgot the most important piece. I still own her." Olivia whimpered, clutching at his coat, but her eyes found Daniel's. Wide, glassy, pleading. Daniel lowered his rifle slightly, hands open, his voice calm though his pulse hammered. "Victor, listen to me. This is between you and me. Let her go. She's a child. She doesn't belong in this." Victor laughed harshly. "A child? You really believe she's mine? Laura betrayed me. She lied, she cheated, and then she left me with this mistake." He shook Olivia hard enough to make her cry out. His voice dropped to a growl. "She's not my blood. She never was." The words struck Olivia like a blade. Her lips trembled. But in the next breath, something inside her broke free. She raised her chin, tears burning down her cheeks, and screamed with all the strength she had left. "You're not my dad! You killed my mom! You're nothing to me!" Victor's eyes widened in rage. He yanked her closer, pistol rising. "Ungrateful brat!" That was the moment Daniel had been waiting for. His hand twitched, signaling Odin. The shepherd exploded from the shadows like a thunderclap, muscle and fury slamming into Victor's side. His teeth sank into Victor's forearm, forcing the gun to clatter across the concrete. Olivia slipped free, stumbling until Daniel swept her into his arms, pulling her behind him. "Stay down," he barked, shielding her with his body. Victor roared in pain, thrashing as Odin dragged him down. Blood smeared across the floor where the shepherd's jaws held tight. Daniel moved in, pressing the muzzle of his rifle to Victor's chest. "Don't move," he growled. Victor spat blood, glaring up at him with venom. "You think this ends me? I have men in every city. You'll never stop it." Daniel shoved him onto his stomach, snapping the cuffs around his wrists with brutal precision. "Maybe not every city," he said coldly, "but it ends here, tonight." Around them, the scattered crates spilled their secrets. Ledgers, shipping manifests, envelopes thick with cash. Years of corruption lay exposed under the flickering warehouse lights. Daniel glanced back. Olivia clung to Odin, who licked her face gently. His muzzle still streaked with Victor's blood. She shook with sobs, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "Uncle Dan, I'm not scared anymore." Daniel's chest tightened. He cupped the back of her head. "You don't have to be. Not ever again." The sirens drew closer now, red and blue lights flashing through the high windows. Daniel hauled Victor upright, forcing him to face the wreckage of his empire. For the first time, the man looked small, stripped of the power he had wielded like a weapon. Daniel whispered against his ear, "You wanted to own her. You wanted to own everything. But she chose her family tonight, and it isn't you." Victor struggled, spitting curses, but it was over. His empire lay in ruins, his crimes bleeding out across the concrete. And in the middle of it all, a little girl stood safe beside the shepherd who had saved her, and the man who had sworn to never let the monster touch her again. The trial of Victor Carter was the talk of Ironwood for weeks. The courthouse, a gray stone building that had stood for nearly a century, became the stage where years of secrets were finally dragged into the light. Reporters lined the steps, cameras flashing in the bitter January wind, as police escorted Victor inside in shackles. His once polished appearance was gone. The tailored suits had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit, his arrogance dulled to a hollow glare. The charges filled pages: human trafficking, money laundering, first-degree murder, child endangerment, and domestic abuse. Each indictment was backed by mountains of evidence: USB files, photographs, ledgers, and the testimony of women he had silenced for too long. But the most powerful evidence came from the quiet video Laura Carter had recorded before her death. The jury sat in heavy silence as her battered face filled the courtroom screens, her voice steady despite her fear. "If I don't make it, please, someone protect my daughter." Daniel sat at the front, Olivia beside him. She wore a simple navy dress Clara had helped her pick out, her arm now healed but still trembling slightly when strangers looked too long. Odin lay at her feet, the big shepherd's head resting across her shoes, as if daring the world to try and take her again. On the witness stand, Clara Jennings testified with surprising strength. The former captive told her story in halting words, how she had been taken, how Victor had controlled her life, and how Daniel and Odin had shattered the cycle. Her testimony, along with that of other rescued women, painted Victor as more than a criminal. He was a monster cloaked in respectability. The presiding judge, Harold Whitmore, was a man in his early 60s, with silver hair, deep lines around his eyes, and a reputation for severity tempered by fairness. Dressed in black robes that brushed the floor, he listened carefully through every testimony. When the verdict came, his voice was firm, echoing through the silent chamber. "Victor Carter, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Your crimes against the innocent, your manipulation, and your violence will not see the light of freedom again." The courtroom stirred with a collective exhale. Victor snarled as deputies led him away, his voice hoarse with curses, but no one listened. His empire was ashes. Olivia reached for Daniel's hand. "Is it really over, Uncle Dan?" she whispered. Daniel squeezed gently. "Yes, sweetheart, it's over." But the trial wasn't the only matter at hand. In a smaller courtroom the following week, Judge Whitmore presided again, this time over Olivia's future. The state had reviewed her case, considered her surviving relatives, and weighed her wishes. A stern woman in her 50s, Marjorie Hill, the child welfare officer, presented the report. Dressed in a gray blazer, her eyes kind but cautious, she read from the file. "Olivia Carter has expressed, consistently and without hesitation, her desire to remain under the care of Deputy Daniel Hayes. He has demonstrated protective capability, stability, and emotional support, assisted by his service animal, Odin. It is our recommendation that guardianship be formally granted." The judge turned to Olivia, his expression softening. "Child, do you understand what this means?" Olivia stood, small but steady, Odin pressing close to her side. She nodded. "It means I can stay with Uncle Dan, with Odin, and I'll have a family again." Her voice cracked but did not falter. Judge Whitmore smiled faintly. "Then, so it shall be." His gavel struck. Guardianship granted. Daniel felt the weight lift from his chest, heavier than any battle he had fought. He bent down, pressing his forehead briefly to Olivia's. "You're home now." Weeks later, Ironwood began to heal. Snow fell fresh and clean, covering the scars of the storm. The substation had been repaired, the broken windows replaced, though the marks of that night would always remain in Daniel's memory. Clara had begun volunteering with outreach programs, helping women who had endured what she had survived. But the most profound change was seen in Olivia. On a crisp morning, the sun peeking through gray clouds, Daniel stood at the edge of the small town's elementary school. Olivia walked ahead, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, Odin trotting faithfully beside her. She wore a bright red coat and knitted gloves, her breath fogging the cold air as she laughed softly at something Odin seemed to understand. Other children paused to admire the dog, and for the first time, Olivia didn't shrink back. She smiled. Daniel watched from a distance, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. His storm-gray eyes softened as he saw her wave before disappearing into the school doors. For years, he had carried the weight of battles fought and lives lost, believing his days of family had ended before they had ever begun. But now, in the simple image of a little girl leading a German shepherd into a new life, he saw something else. Renewal, hope, A family not born of blood, but forged in fire and snow. As flakes drifted down once more, Daniel let the smallest of smiles spread across his face. "You're safe now, kid," he whispered. "You're finally safe." Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels in the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through a broken child finding safety, a loyal dog standing guard, and a man who chose to protect instead of turn away. This story reminds us that God still works in the shadows of our world. He brings light where there is fear, and He builds families not only by blood, but by love and courage. In our daily lives, we may not all face monsters like Victor Carter, but we do face struggles, loneliness, and fear. And still, God sends us signs, through kindness, through loyalty, through the courage to stand for what is right. If Olivia could find hope again, then so can we. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that miracles are real. Comment Amen below if you believe God still protects the most vulnerable. Do not forget to subscribe and stay with us for more stories of faith, courage, and hope. May God bless you and your family.